So today in the Chicago Teachers Union Executive Board meeting, we discussed a possible resolution about solidarity with Palestine. And I felt very much compelled to speak on behalf of it. These are the remarks that I gave. Jewish life is important to me, and I'm a member of a congregation, Congregation Zedek Chicago. And one of the most important Jewish values to me is the concept of tikkun olam, which is the concept of healing the world. The concept of that we come to the world and it's a very broken place. And in our short time on earth, we should be working to put it back together and mend all the fractures in society. And this, this leads me to talk about how I feel that the Jewish state of Israel and Zionism in the year 2021 is actually anti-Semitic. Michael Brooks said it's not complicated. If you believe that all people are created equal with certain human rights that cannot be abused, you can't justify the actions of the state of Israel. The situation in the West Bank can be described as Jim Crow. Gaza is a concentration camp, and only one side has all the power to stop this. You see that image of a child throwing a rock at a tank. You have to look at that critically, the way we teach our students. Who has the power? The 13-year-old with the rock or the 18-year-old with the tank? Only one side has that power. And let's even look at that dynamic. A 13-year-old fighting an 18-year-old over a piece of land. Neither of them have a choice. Israelis are conscripted to military service at 18. They roll tanks over children, or they go to prison. Israeli families feed a war machine they do not even control. Nearly 75% of eligible young people are currently in the Israeli Defense Forces, versus right now 10% of all Americans are veterans or have once served in the military or are currently serving in the military. There's a big disparity there. The state of Israel sacrifices the lives of their babies, and not for their own security, but for American, the European Union's interests. To me, that's anti-Semitism. We have to ask the question, why does Richard Spencer, an avowed white supremacist, support the state of Israel unequivocally? He hates the Jewish people. He wants to see us all leave the US and Europe so he can have white Christian nations. This isn't a contradiction. Zionism in 1921 meant building the Jewish working class so we can emancipate ourselves. In 2021, it means sending them off to war to fight other people's children over land that is geopolitically advantageous to Western corporations. Israel does not represent Judaism. It represents a 100-year-old theory that claims to speak for our 4,000-year-old people. Jews have survived in spite of virulent anti-Semitism for centuries through our creativity and through sheer will, without a Jewish state. And the state of Israel is not necessary to our survival, but it is necessary to Western hegemony, which I just mentioned has anti-Semitism baked right into it. And this is why, in the spirit of Tikkun Olam, I stand unconditionally for Palestinian people.
Okay, this is Give Them an Argument. I am Producer Forrest, aka Forrest Miller, and I'm here with teacher, union activist, podcast extraordinaire, Kenzo Shibata.
Thank you, Forrest. Very kind intro.
Yeah, I even made the graphic for you. These are his two shows. Everybody tune in. Anyway, so today we're going to be talking about teachers unions and BDS and the move, the pro-Palestinian movement in teachers unions across the country. And you had that speech, but you've also had a lot of good tweets about it recently. And so I thought you'd be a perfect person to talk about this with. And I don't know. So I guess to set it up, before anything else, the first teachers union, K through 12 teachers union, of course, there's been college teachers unions that have, made a lot more, moves towards the BDS movement. But, I think for good reason. I think that, colleges are a lot more, I guess, like internationally connected, you might say. And Yeah, so San Francisco a couple weeks ago, during the last Gaza skirmish, became the first K through 12 union to endorse BDS, and this was kind of a somewhat big story. I think people that wanted to make the point that fearmonger about Palestinian rights and the state of Israel kind of jumped on it, and we can go over the resolution that they passed once we set it up, I think, but. So the first thing I wanted to set up is, California in general. I guess when I first thought about this, I think all unions should obviously show solidarity with the Palestinian people. I think it's important, and I think it does a lot for, the public opinion change on this issue. But I was wondering, why is it such a big deal that K through 12, K through 12 teachers unions are now supporting it, as opposed to like other unions, dock workers are the biggest example, and we can talk about that later.
Dock workers are so far ahead of the curve when it comes to international solidarity, and that's a story that needs to be told, especially when we're talking about like South African apartheid. But yeah, K-12, this is a big complication. So I gave that speech in an executive board meeting. I'm on the executive board of the CTU. In support of a similar resolution to support Palestine.
And you're in Chicago. I don't know if we set that up at the beginning of this, but I mean, I think everybody knows that, but just for the context of where this is.
So, I mean, that's very important because the makeup of our union is not just diverse racially, but even politically. And so, we were a union that was forced, into austerity for decades. And we had laws that were written to weaken our power. We were really on our heels for a while. And in the past 10 years, we were able to turn that around and build some political power. But within that, a union like ours, because we represent a big, diverse city, is more or less a coalition of different sets of politics. So, like, for example, if you go to the far northwest side or the far southwest side of the city, it's that's where all the police live, and the police and the firefighters, because we have a residency requirement here. But they do everything they can to replicate the suburban living in the city by living like just over the border of the suburbs. So like these are people that send their kids to suburban Catholic schools. They do all their shopping, and all their civic clubs are in the suburbs because they fucking hate the city. And a lot of our members are married to cops, and they're from these neighborhoods, and they're very conservative. And
which I kind of I mean, it is a thing about unions in general. Like in the United States, like police unions have kind of been built into this whole idea of union organizing, which I mean, which is controversial to say the least, but because they wield pretty much unquestioned power in most cities. But yeah, I think so that's like an interest. That's a part of the coalition, I think, that has interests opposite a lot of the rank and file members.
Funny little anecdote recently, Karen Lewis, our former president, who really was leading the charge in that revolution, she died recently, and someone quoted a former FOP president, a Fraternal Order of Police president, talking about her, and I just remember thinking, man, she hated his ass. They were both in the Chicago Federation of Labor. They had to have cordial relations, but it's just like, she would have smacked him. But well, I mean, specifically because the police, whenever they tried to make overtures to the teachers union, it was always in the context of saying like, your students are criminals, and that's why we have common interests. And the former CTU leadership, took that, and we were like, no, our students are the reason why we exist. Like, they aren't criminals. You make them criminals. The police do. So
and of course, incentivized within that is like the neoliberalization of cities. where kind of students are just stats. And if you get into neighborhoods that are seen as bad enough, it just becomes about passing these statistics and trying to get as many students as possible to graduate. And which is a good goal, but like it comes in the form of standardized testing and like statistics. And I don't know. I don't think obviously it's like a super realistic show in all ways, but like The Wire did a really good job of kind of showing that connection. How like police departments and teachers unions end up being kind of interchanged at times in some cities where or in some neighborhoods where just getting by kind of is the underfunded schools, underfunded teachers unions, underfunded everything.
Yeah, and so it seems like we would want to be in coalition with them, with the FOP, but we absolutely don't want to be. And that causes that contradiction within our union causes some tension. Like the police in my politics, the police are not part of the working class, but their spouses, many of whom are teachers, I would consider to be part of the working class. But what happens is because they're part of our union, they bring the politics of the police in with them, and they make a voting contingent in the union. And so ultimately, when we started talking about putting that resolution out, the Palestine Solidarity Resolution out to our House of Delegates, which is the voting body of our union made up of all the building representatives. So there's about 800 members there. And I would say like the conservative element is overrepresented there, because those are folks that like they do take union leadership in their buildings. And I knew that this would just cause pandemonium. Like for me, it took me about 2 decades to come to my analysis on Palestine, and the conclusion that I had to be unequivocally in solidarity with Palestine. And
by all facets of our society, we're so pushed towards either, the position that you were talking about with Michael Brooks, which is like, it's a complicated issue. Maybe we should have hands off. Maybe just the expert should discuss it. Like, I understand, like there's bad things on both sides. So that's like the one position. And of course, the other position that, I think a lot of the most politically active, I guess, people are pushed towards is the unequivocal support for Israel position.
Yeah. So I ultimately said this is not the time to actually put this in front of our 800 body membership. And frankly, a lot of it is because we're on our heels on many fronts. Like we just had a really bad fight about safely reopening, where, all credit due to the union. Like we made the gold standard in our agreement. As far as like what safe reopening would look like compared to any other big city district.
Yeah, you guys really led the charge on that.
But I think we lost a lot of political capital with the community. Both sides did, actually. I think the school board did as well. And, it's just, we have to take that in account too. Like we aren't powerful enough right now to be taking on internal fights that are going to divide us. I think so. The best route, and I talked to a bunch of, I'm in a few different chat groups with Teachers for Palestine within CTU. We're going to do political education, and we're going to team up. We're talking about maybe teaming up with DSA in doing that, because we need to like at least have like a vanguard within the union who's going to, lead political education. And we may never reach those we're never going to reach those right wingers. Let's be honest here. But if we can get like, I don't know, 65% of the union at some point on board with this, people who are somewhere on the fence, but, with the right organizing, political education can be moved over. It might be a 5 or 10 year project, but I think, we can do it.
Yeah, completely. So, the teachers union, I guess that K through 12 teachers union that did do it, obviously is San Francisco. And, so I wanted to go into, I think, why California is the most suited to do this, and why really the battles between, pro-Zionist organizations, pro-Israel organizations, and and you know, the establishment versus, you know, people that believe in Palestinian liberation, people that believe in Palestinian sovereignty, you know, why those, and you know, a democratization, you know, in the long run of these two nations, into one. I mean, I think that that's, for a lot of people, the one state solution. You know, it doesn't get talked about, but that kind of is what ultimately has to happen. So yeah, so this is from the Sun Sentinel, which is obviously, you know, it's Jewish news of Northern California. But in a historic endorsement, San Francisco's teacher union passed a resolution in support of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel. The United Educators of San Francisco, which has 6,200 members, is the first American K through 12 union of public school teachers to officially support BDS, although other education and trade unions have done so. The resolution passed on May 19th, days before Israel and Hamas agreed to a ceasefire on May 20th. After 11 days of fighting, more than 250 Palestinians and 12 Israelis were killed in the conflict. I think that's you know, I mean, it goes on to become a lot more fear-mongery and you know, pro-Israel in that article. But I think that that's a good, you know, a good summation of what happened. So I guess I wanted to start out with two different things, setting this up. So the first one comes from the Electric Intifada podcast, which we had Nora Barris Friedman on a few weeks ago to talk to us during the conflict, that where you know, during the bombardments, I guess.
Oh, I actually have a story about the Electric Intifada later to tell you, and it's directly related to what we're talking
All right. Well, so this is from their podcast about fighting censorship of Palestine, and it really, I think, on a lot of levels, you know, it has to do with you know, events getting shut down, a pro-Palestine event, but you know, multiple events in multiple cities getting shut down, and by Zoom, which, you know, is working with these college campuses, you know, to create classes. So taken down as a platform, the college pretending to support it, but then ultimately basically leaving the professors and you know, the professors and students out to dry. So this is kind of what this is the first, I guess, example of you know, how deep some of this goes.
So what ended up happening first was Zoom's lawyers contacts the CSU systems lawyers, and then it goes down the chain of command, if you will, because, you know, these universities are corporate structures at this point, public or not, right? And it goes to the provost of San Francisco State University, then sends a joint email to Dr. Abdulhadi and Dr. Kinakawa. Actually, I don't know if it's the same email or in the same thread or two emails, but in any case, the provost sends the email informing them that Zoom's lawyers has contacted the CSU and informing them of the allegations that of material support for terrorism, and suggests that both of them seek legal counsel. Wow. Not that the university is going to provide the legal counsel, that they seek independent legal counsel. Okay, so multiple issues going on. One, right, it's the fear tactic. It's the, you know, we're accusing you of material support for terrorism. The second is you better lawyer up. And the third is we're not going to provide you that lawyer. Okay. And so kind of then you know, there's a large the legal attacks against Palestine scholars and activists is not new. So there's a body, right? That, you know, people are aware of these situations. So, you know, the call was made for legal support. There were, you know, a number of you know, activist lawyers got on board and began kind of interpreting the matter. And they said, listen, like, there is absolutely no crime being done. This is meritless. These accusations are absolutely meritless. And not only that, the material support clause is in and of itself, like, you know, this egregious, you know, relic of the USA Patriot Act, right? And we know the terrible things that the USA Patriot Act has done, right? It is, you know, it's not a good thing, to say the least, right? It has led to mass incarceration, mass surveillance, mass policing, you know, mass death. I mean, it's, you know, these things are being used as kind of legitimizing of kind of the violent apparatus of the state force, which, you know, Omar, you can talk more about. But in any case, so they're trying to bring it here. So the university's response was, so San Francisco State's, and I say this because UC Merced followed the pattern exactly. The academic approach was that this is academic freedom. We will let the event go on, with caveat, because the other academic approach was, we don't agree with their speech. Their speech is anti-Semitic. Their speech is hatred, but we're going to protect the speech. And this is the same thing that they do with white supremacy on campus, right? It's the same. And so in that one stroke, you know, they say they're going to protect our academic freedom, and people congratulate them for it, but at what cost? Because they're saying that these people are terrorists, these people are terrorist supporters, and these people are anti-Semite, but we're going to accept them nonetheless, right? So it was completely inappropriate response in terms of how they conceptualize our narratives, right, and what we were teaching. On top of that, what the university then did was held a vigil for Jewish students to discuss anti-Semitism, where they invited, I think, like ADL, Campus Hallel. I believe the Israeli consulate also was part of it. The university provost was provost. The president spoke, and the provost office, as well as the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion office, co-sponsored this event, right? So essentially, the university is pushing that line: is that we hate what they're saying. You know, we hate what these Palestinians are saying. We hate, you know, don't support the Palestinians, but we're gonna let it happen because we're so, you know, whatever they want to call themselves, right?
It's a free speech, allegedly.
Right.
Free, yeah. While they're smearing us and basically putting us in the same box as white supremacists.
They're delegitimizing you, is what they're doing.
Right.
Exactly. And so then what happened was we decided to push the university on many fronts, but one of the fronts was to say, give us an alternative platform. Okay. We said, if we were in person and let's say, you know, a water pipe breaks in the building, you're going to relocate my classroom. You're going to give me another classroom. Okay. We don't agree with Zoom, what Zoom said about shutting down our event, because they did shut down the event the morning of. But we're going to say, give us an alternative platform that has the same capacities, that can reach the 1,500 people, that all the The university's response was, we don't have the technological capacity to do that. You can't use, they're contracted with I think Microsoft Teams. Well, you can't use Teams for San Francisco's policies. You can't use Teams for course instruction. Yeah, it's not intended for that. It's intended for like team building or whatever. So they said, why don't you use your personal Microsoft Skype account? Use your personal Skype account, and then go ahead and get a third-party system, or download a third-party software integrated into the Skype, your personal Skype, that would allow for streaming, and then stream it to your personal, you know, social media site like Facebook or whatever. And we're like, listen, this is the morning of the event. What? Yeah. I don't know how to integrate third-party software to allow Skype to go and like, I don't know how to do this, right? Do it for us. They can't do it for us because it's not technically. Then they say, well, they can't do it because it's not technically San Francisco property, because it's not San Francisco software, right? So now it becomes outside of the bounds of the AT. So now they've done their duty by giving us alternative that has, but then they also have done it in a way that they actually don't have to provide any support whatsoever, because they don't own any of the software rights to the things that they've just suggested to us.
Neoliberalism has an answer for everything.
Yeah. No, it really does. And protecting the status quo is obviously, you know, what it does best.
What was most striking to me there, though, is like, we know how college campuses are right now politically, and we know how all the bosses and HR folks are like very woke washing everything. And now they're woke washing against Palestine.
Yeah.
Isn't that just such an ugly contradiction?
And you know, we're gonna watch that really grotesque Ruth Weiss clip, I think, at the end of this. But you know, she kind of makes it very clear that, you know, one function of Israel's defenders needs to be keeping up with the latest language. Like she talks about intersectionality. She's like, oh, that didn't exist way back when, but now that it exists, like we need to be using all of these woke phrases and unwoke phrases. It's kind of funny that pro-Zionist forces will use both, like the woke appeals and the extremely anti-woke, like cancel culture obsessed appeals for their ends. And you can see like the same line being pushed by sometimes like the same Twitter accounts, I think. But so that's the first one. He goes on to talk about the fact that I guess they eventually decided to use Facebook and archive everything on Facebook, and of course Facebook suspended their account because and so their archive of lectures and this isn't like like a lot of the speakers that they had planned were like South African apartheid activists. You know what I mean? Like Ronnie Kasrils, who Michael Brooks interviewed, and I remember he was like, that was like the proudest interview he really ever did, I think. He talked about all the time. It was very early on in his Majority Report tenure. So Ronnie
Kasrils, exactly why technocrats have a technological answer for everything, because technology is inherently undemocratic. I know people don't want to admit it, but like once you hand over some sort of order of operations or some sort of operations of a democratic body to a tech company, they're not bound by any kind of laws the way we are.
Yeah.
They operate as corporations, and corporations can fuck up and like not answer for their technical, like Facebook, of course. Facebook is notorious. Like we've all had to do business with Facebook. They never answer their emails. They never tell you why, your ads are rejected. Like it's very, very biased.
We only just started using Facebook as a place to broadcast, but I don't think we put any money into the advertising side of it yet. Thank fucking God, because that does sound like a disaster. Everything I've heard about.
I used to do digital organizing when I worked for the unions doing communications, I'd say like 2009 to 2013, highly effective stuff. You just would kind of have to rip off the Obama model and use it towards your own union campaigns, because if you had people power, if you organized a bunch of people who had a bunch of followers, you could just shoot out an email and get a message across. As soon as Facebook monetized everything, you can't do that really anymore, because you're competing with Coca-Cola for people's news feeds.
Yeah, and of course, with union organizing specifically, like tech companies really don't want that on their on their platform. They don't want their employees seeing it. They don't want anybody thinking about it. They don't want that on anybody's minds. They don't want the union movement to grow stronger, because tech companies are a family.
You could play pool and drink beer on the job. Why would you want a union?
All right, so that's the first one, and I think that makes clear why the UC system specifically, but colleges I think are very, very quick to organize for Palestinian rights, and have embraced the BDS movement. At least like the faculty side of colleges, not obviously the administrator side, but so this brings up the K through 12 angle of it, which is kind of what I was wondering about, because you don't think about, like, you think about like the history that you kind of learn in public school, and I mean, like, isn't the deeper analysis, I guess, that you learn in college. I mean, I think a lot of people have made that point, I think, and even with I mean, amazing teachers, like there's just so much to cover, and students really have to learn the basics, and obviously everything is neoliberalized. Like I know in New York, like they're teaching to the regents, so like either the regents or like the AP test. So that kind of, you don't think about that being a hotbed for political action on this. I mean, obviously you have a strong stand on it, and I think now more public school teachers unions are going to move in solidarity because of San Francisco and because of what California's been going through. But this is this kind of shows you how all of this intersects with K through 12 schools specifically, and it has to do with the ethnic studies programs that because they created in California an ethnic studies model curriculum. and it was very quick to get shut down, even by like Gavin Newsom, which gets covered in the first part of this clip, who had enthusiastically supported like an ethnic studies curriculum for college campuses. K through 12 was kind of he couldn't touch that as a reason for or as a requirement for graduation.
We're amidst this unrest that's not been seen since the civil rights movement.
Today, the president of the California Teachers Association disappointed after Governor Gavin Newsom vetoed a bill last night that would have required ethnic studies in high schools.
When I was growing up, and I'm Black, African American, there was very few items in our history books.
The bill would have required high schools to provide ethnic studies starting in 2025, and for students to take at least a semester of ethnic studies to graduate starting in 2029. The bill's author, Assemblyman Jose Medina, calls the governor's veto a failure to push back against President Donald Trump.
And it's been 4 years of pitting one group against another. I think enough is enough, and that California should stand up to the rhetoric of President Trump.
Medina also calls the veto a disservice to students like Alvin Lee.
We need to tell them that as students...
The high school senior hosted virtual student rallies supporting the bill as the head of the statewide student group, Generation Up.
I think it was almost disrespectful to a lot of students across California that this wasn't signed into law.
As a Chinese American, Alvin wants his textbooks to include people who also look like him.
It isn't just, white heroes like, Christopher Columbus or, folks like George Washington or Thomas Jefferson, right? There was a lot more history behind it, and we don't learn a lot about the other important figures that contributed.
Governor Newsom says he values ethnic studies, which is why he signed a similar bill for the California State University system last month. But in a letter, the governor says he vetoed this bill over concerns the draft curriculum was insufficiently balanced and inclusive. The American Jewish Committee applauds the governor's move, saying the curriculum excludes several ethnic groups.
That's Jewish groups, but also Korean, Armenian, and Sikhs and Hindus.
While AJC supports ethnic studies, they worry the curriculum could be taught in anti-Semitic ways.
It's important that if there's a curriculum that's designed to combat racism and discrimination, that the Jewish community is able to use this as an opportunity to also educate kids about the dangers of anti-Semitism.
Education advocates all fighting for ethnic studies, but disagreeing on the best way to get it into the classroom. In Sacramento, Marlene Martinez, KCRA 3 News.
Israel lobby groups are continuing to hijack public education in California in order to censor Palestinian and Arab scholarship and protect Israel from criticism at all costs. Over the last few years, as we've reported, anti-Palestinian organizations have attacked the California Education Department over an initial draft of a statewide ethnic studies model curriculum. That draft highlighted Arab American studies and accurately described the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, or BDS, campaign for Palestinian rights. But that curriculum was sidelined in August 2019 after Israel advocacy groups complained that the curriculum, quote, singles out Israel for criticism and would institutionalize, in quotes, anti-Semitic stereotypes in public schools. A revised program was proposed, reinstating Arab American studies, but California public education officials capitulated to the demands by Israel lobby groups to gut the program, which was rubber-stamped earlier this month, and to abandon the route of the Ethnic Studies Project and erase all mentions of Palestine. In disgust, all 20 of the ethnic studies educators who drafted the original version of the curriculum demanded that their names be removed, and the California Teachers Association said it would be unable to approve this version.
As is often the case when Black, Indigenous, people of color gain power, attacks on ethnic studies have plagued the field since its earliest days. These attacks have been vigorously and effectively opposed by student activists and organizers, as well as by professional academic associations. Today's fight to maintain the integrity of California's ethnic studies model curriculum is the next phase of the fight to defend ethnic studies, particularly against objections to the inclusion of content about Palestinian Americans in the Arab American Studies portion of the curriculum. As someone who has long supported the Palestinian people, I know that we cannot capitulate here. The field of ethnic studies is not complete without the inclusion of content related to Palestine, Palestinians, and Palestinian Americans. To attempt to erase Palestinians from the curriculum is to engage in an intellectual strategy that reiterates the non-recognition of Palestinians by the state of Israel and the political process that Israeli historian Ilan Pappé refers to as ethnic cleansing.
Oof.
Yeah, Gavin Newsom, not good. But so I think those are the two sectors, I guess, of this fight, because college campuses are obviously easier to organize. The students are adults, so students can be organized. I think that K through 12, like high school students, like obviously can be organized, but I think that people would look down on teachers, inspiring them to do that, if it's something that pushes against establishment and capital. So there's college campuses I think are easier on this issue, but then on top of that, the K through 12 thing, it really does touch on those on lesson plans and on curriculum and everything else in that case, because I think that the Israeli lobby and pro-Zionist organizations, pro-Israel organizations, they really understand that in the future, and this is what I think gets covered in that in the Ruth Weiss clip, but they really understand that education is a huge front in this battle, because public opinion is everything.
Yeah, well, this is what I thought was so striking about that clip you just showed, Forrest, about that Jewish group. And like, I kind of feel like I should have a disclaimer. I'm Jewish, because this take might be, can be taken be taken in bad faith. But so she is putting this dichotomy between learning about the plight of the Jewish people versus this ethnic studies fight. Well, like, at what grade do we learn about the Holocaust? At what grade do we learn about Anne Frank? Like, we're very well aware of the Jewish Holocaust, probably by the time we're in like second grade. So for her to say that like having this ethnic studies program later on for students, in higher grades is somehow going to take that away is so disingenuous, and it's so reeks of the Israel lobby.
I feel like I learned more about World War II in high school than like really, anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And both, I took AP Euro, and then I took regular U.S. history. So like I in both of those you learn pretty heavily about World War II. You learn about like the Holocaust, but you also learn about a really glorified version of American involvement. Not really so much about Russian involvement, but
yeah, we get a really fucked up version of how that war.
Yeah.
Ended.
So this goes perfectly with what you're saying, though, because this is an ABC report that I found when I just typed in California ethnic studies, because I was looking for specific. I didn't know if I wanted to lean that heavily on the Electric Intifada, because we use the first one, and like it just at that point just becomes like a Electronic Intifada podcast. So I was looking for like a more diverse like a more diverse array of clips. But so I found this, and this is probably the most pro-Zionist ABC version of this report that I could possibly find.
A proposal to omit Jewish history from a state-approved course on ethics studies is raising alarms with politicians and parents. They tell 10 News reporter
Ethics studies, by the way, she said.
Ignoring the history of the Jewish struggle amounts to anti-Semitism.
The Jewish struggle.
Of the curriculum say that the Holocaust will still be taught in history class. However, given the discrimination that Jewish people have faced for quite a while, they don't understand why they're left out on a course on discrimination.
It's a question about inclusion in the classroom. We are very concerned.
California's ethnic studies curriculum is only a rough draft in its lesson plans on oppressed and discriminated communities, but some feel there's a major omission.
In the glossary where it goes over manifestations of bias and bigotry, it actually doesn't include anti-Semitism, while it includes a bunch of other forms of bias, so that's very concerning.
The state's first high school ethnic studies curriculum lists African Americans, Arab Americans, Asians, Latinos, and Native Americans as marginalized groups. However, Kelsey Greenberg Young with the Anti-Defamation League says, what about us on behalf of Jewish people?
Well, we have hate crimes constantly, but we had a huge hate crime in our own community here with people being targeted for being Jewish. So to omit Jews as a people and to omit Jews being targeted by anti-Semitism is very hurtful and also very problematic when you're trying to actually expand the minds of these young students.
Questions are swirling why the state-funded group that put together the plan would provide lessons on Islamophobia, but leave out anti-Semitism, especially after shootings like Poway in Pittsburgh. In a statement on the California Department of Education's website, they write, students that become more engaged in school through courses like ethnic studies are more likely to graduate and feel more personally empowered.
We're confident they will. We hope they will.
Those not recognized as marginalized in this proposal believe the state will change its list, adding that they wouldn't be speaking up if they didn't feel excluded already.
Anti-Semitism hasn't gone away. It's on the rise. And so we need to be focusing on challenging the bias and bigotry that are affecting
They really have her as like the main person that they've interviewed in all of in this entire report.
The various groups against this document, urging people to go comment about this document online. This is the email where you can email state officials that put this together. Again, this will all potentially be taught to high school kids, so it is fairly
like you can't get Abe Foxman out there just like barking.
But yeah, I think it highlights though a reason that it can be so daunting for and I mean you know this better than anybody I think, but so daunting for public school teachers K through 12 to kind of like jump on these kinds of issues because like teachers unions are obviously already fighting against neoliberalization, they're fighting against underfunding, they're fighting against what I mean, like parents trying to push certain agendas on students, like in other ways. They're fighting against the evangelical lobby, like what I mean, like fighting against so many different forces. And then like and this is true both in I think for like kind of progressive politicians too. Like there's so many domestic and local concerns that really so something like Israel and Palestine kind of get swept under the rug fairly easily when pressure is put on it because like how much political capital, like as you said in the beginning, like do you want to spend on any particular issue when when the funding isn't there for you, when you're constantly being pushed to have bigger class sizes, when you're constantly pushed to have just every possible roadblock is put up, so it can be, I think, pretty daunting when any pressure is put that like is this the time for this fight? And I think in a lot of cases maybe it's not for K through 12 teachers unions, but I think that the ethnic studies controversy does show that there is a pretty a pretty direct connection between these those kinds of programs and the Israel-Palestine situation.
It's so crazy. They feel like if any other kind of discrimination is taught, that diminishes anti-Semitism. That seems to be the bottom line in the messaging in all those clips we just saw. And it's such a toxic way of I mean, it's Israel. It's Israel. It's Zionism, right? Like the idea that it's a power grab at any moment because at any other given moment, someone's going to take that power away from you.
Yeah. So I think lastly, asking the question, why public school, why teachers in general and why leftists specifically should care about the education side of this is, there's a bunch of reasons that we've laid out already, but the most simple, I think, is that we shouldn't cede it to pro-Zionist forces. We shouldn't cede it to pro-imperialist forces. And I think pro-Zionist leaders and professors and everything really do understand how important education is. So I wanted to play the really just grotesque clip that has gotten covered by everybody, but I don't think we played it on here yet.
And you will say, what? You want us to make you look good? That's not my job. Your job is to make us look good. Our job is not to make you look good, American Jews. What do you have to worry about? Your job is to make us look good. And here's how you do it. Every one of us has to serve 3 years in the Army, 2 years in the Army, some of us 5 years, and then for the rest of our lives, you have got to serve 2 or 3 years in the army of words. You've got to learn to fight the political battle, which is even more important at this point than the military battle that we are. We'll fight the military battle. We're not asking you necessarily to come and be lone soldiers, although some of you can. You've got to learn how to fight back on the campuses, how to make the arguments. Now they keep shifting.
Give them an argument.
How to give them an argument.
Changing the language. Intersectionality wasn't even a word 10 years ago. Now suddenly it's intersectionality. You've got to stay on top of it. And you know how we train for the Army? We don't train for defensive warfare. If the war against Israel ever had to be fought on Israeli soil, do I have to tell you? It's an impossibility. So it's the same thing. Don't let the war of words ever be fought about Israel's nature. Let it be fought about why you can't accept Israel, why you have to single out this tiny people. Try to find Israel on the map. It's hardly there. You know, we used to play this game, Where's Waldo? Where is Waldo on the map? Are you going to really tell me that this is the country you want to blame? Push them, teach them how to defend by attacking. Teach them really what one says as in fencing. You've got to do that. You've got to make demands on them. They've got to serve for 3 years in the army of words.
Yeah. So Waldo didn't deserve that. Waldo didn't deserve to get dragged into that. Waldo's a man of the world, you know? He's been everywhere. You know?
Actually,
so I guess yeah.
I was gonna say I have this new bit, communist John Taffer, where it's like, yelling at when leftists act foolishly, and that's kind of what she's doing with the Zionist is like, get your act straight. Intersectionality. You're gonna stay up all night learning the word intersectionality if you want Zionism to happen. That was what. You're
gonna learn every time what's woke, what's not woke. You're gonna be able to just tweet it out. It's the war of words. I really wish on other issues that we could use like the phrase "the war of words" because I feel like everyone would feel like everybody on Twitter would feel like they're doing like God's work pretty much.
Yeah.
Like oh, don't worry about me. I'm out here on the battleground on the war of words. So yeah, I wanted to throw it to you though, and I just generally, I think, as somebody on the ground doing, organizing in teachers unions, I wanted to ask about, how you feel about the state of public school unions and this issue right now.
Well, I think that if you're in a local, in a union that has the support there, go ahead and pass a resolution because, we need to have our unions geared to be internationalist because so the top of the like just looking at my union, the AFT, top of the food chain is Randi Weingarten, she's a DC creature. She's not a teacher. She's not part of the rank and file. She will always choose the DC consensus over her own members. And she's also
she was brought in by Lori Lightfoot, right?
No, Randi Weingarten?
Yeah.
No.
Oh, she was.
They actually had a beef. Politics were interesting during that last strike because Lori Lightfoot's people tried to paint Randi Weingarten as being racist. It was that was just a weird thing.
Yeah. I remember that one. I don't remember if it was like a Dr. Seuss tweet or something that I sent to you before we did Meet the Left that they called racist. They were like, oh, it's like racist and homophobic towards Lori Lightfoot.
Was Scooby-Doo. Like,
oh yeah.
Mask off, and it was Lori Lightfoot and her campaign were like, that was racist. The CTU's racist. And just, come on, man. Like, Randi Weingarten, hardcore Zionist. And before her, I mean, all of the AFT presidents have been, starting with Al Shanker, who was, he was a Red Guard guy. Like he was spitting out communist.
That's a pretty funny name.
Al Shanker.
Al Shanker.
He was actually referenced in the Woody Allen movie Sleeper, and like they made a joke about how like, Al Shanker got a hold of the atomic bomb and that ended society or something like that. Because he was also a big warmonger. He was a Democrat, unionist, but very anti-communist at home and abroad.
As a weird amount of union organizers were. I mean, obviously, like, the major ones broke with like communist groups and kind of expelled communist members, or who they believed were communist sympathetic members, I guess, from their organizations at one point. And I've been reading like the books of Rick Perlstein a lot. And in Nixonland, he talks about Hubert Humphrey, who was vice president and somebody who pushed for, I think, the union movement pretty heavily throughout his tenure in office. But when it came to like Vietnam, like he pretty much expended all of his political capital on defending the Vietnam War, because all of the factions within the Democratic Party, like a lot of them were anti-war, some of them were pro-union, but understandable that a lot of people that are, and which the AFL-CIO I think is starting to turn maybe the corner on this, but they do a lot of business with Israeli companies and Israeli labor. So it's definitely hard to get some of like the more hardline union people, like at least like union management, to support this specific issue.
And then like on top of it all, like there's an organization called Education International, and they kind of operate like an IMF, or a global conglomerate of the ruling class, but specifically on education issues. And they get involved in geopolitics, and it's neoliberal, neoconservative. It's very pro-Zionist, and the AFT through Randy Weingarten is involved in this. It's called Education International. Lois Weiner wrote about it in The Future of Our School. She goes into detail about this organization. So like, it's not like people sometimes like to paint it as like she's Jewish and she's married to a rabbi, and that's why she has these Zionist views. But no, it's not a personal thing. Like, she's a part of these global organizations that want to keep like a certain geopolitics within our local unions. So one of the things I think is very hopeful in watching like San Francisco, in watching in Chicago us struggle internally about this, is that's going to be a wake-up call to her eventually, that people draw a line in the sand there, no pun intended, over Israel Palestine, that could put her on her heels one day. So I think this is continuously building power for us as leftists within the labor movement.
Yeah, well, I don't know necessarily about Education International, but like just in general, like these international humanitarian, I guess, coalitions that pop up that were really popular during like the Clinton administration. Very insidiously, support generally like status quo geopolitics. And that's why it's so easy for them to operate the way they do. Like, I feel like there's a lot of groups with like very benign sounding names supporting like the global order right now that claim to provide like either humanitarian aid or services, or be some kind of global outreach committee that that really serve to just preserve things how they are right now, in like a neoliberal sense. Anyway, so the last, I guess, well, I wanted to talk about two more things, but the last thing on the subject of Israel Palestine, I want to do something fun. Well, actually, I wanted to talk about the dock worker story too. But so one of the last things I wanted to do was, and I have to pull this up really fast. You sent me the Ryan Lay skating in Palestine video that you did, which I really
this was fun.
loyal customers. With this thought in mind,
visited Palestine, met some amazing skaters there who are like literally the very first people to ever skateboard in Palestine. And there's an organization out there called Skate Pal, and I met a lot of people who are kind of helping run programs there, and visited. They have 2 small skate parks that they built in villages in the West Bank, and yeah, made some really great friends. And I've been out there a couple times, and the last time we filmed the full video part that we sold to Thrasher, and I guess the goal there was to kind of showcase a different side of Palestine that you don't typically see, because there's a lot of documentaries that are made about it, and you know, my thing is that I make skate parts, you know, and so I was like, I want to go make a skate part with like some of the skaters there, that, you know, and without you know, focusing on just the wall and the dark side of things, because it so often gets highlighted, you know, it's a conflict zone. And so, yeah, we had a good time. We did that like pretty much all of November, and then it came out a few weeks ago.
So yeah, no, I really love that for the reason that he states at the end, which is that, you know, so much of the Palestinian experience, even among leftists, you know, is portrayed as this sorrowful and, like, you know, tragic lived experience, which it is definitely. I mean, you know, because it is like an atrocity happening, but at the same time, like, the more you focus on that, I think, without focusing on, you know, how human and, you know, how you know, just how the connections that we have as humans, and like the interests that we have as humans generally, and the joy that we experience at different times. I think it kind of, you know, it kind of makes it look like yes, we support like, you know, countries around the world that are oppressed, or you know we're against oppression, but you know, it's all oppression and everything is kind of miserable. And you know what I mean? Like at the same time, Israel is very good at kind of at times, you know, like maybe not so much the IDF photos, but like at other times, like, you know, making everybody see like, oh, you know, Israel is just like a regular, you know, old like democracy. You know, we just hang out and everyone has a good time. And then, you know, you go to Palestine and, you know, they're evil and they want to kill us. We're just trying to be like pretty much just like Americans, but, you know, in Israel. So I think that side of it is really good to focus on. The joy and the you know, and the interest and the love that really exists within Palestine too.
And that organization that brings the boards out there, Skate Pal. I'm actually going to be doing a charity stream sometime in the summer, later in the summer for them. The skate companies, they don't distribute out there. Like they don't have a way of doing it. So this organization is really the only opportunity these kids get to have the equipment and people out there to train them on how to skate. So like, yeah, it's something that there was a small group of skaters there, and other folks saw what they were doing and were like, yeah, this needs to be you know, this needs to be watered and let to grow, because, you know, the skate scene out there, the kids have a right to, like, you know, this is the roses we talk about when we talk about bread and roses. They have the right to that.
Yes, completely. Yeah, and I don't think that, you know, the right to have fun and have interests and you know, and just be a person, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. I don't think that gets talked about enough when it comes to people talking about freedom for you know, people living in the third world, people living in colonial situations, because, and I mean, you know, with an understandable reason, like it gets so hard to you know, the fight is so difficult, I think, that, you know, that's what gets focused on. But at the same time, like it also kind of creates an almost like alien image to people, you know what I mean? Like, oh, this is just mass suffering going on in this place, and you know, and that's because of these situations. But like, you know, all that happens here is suffering, and that's not true for any community anywhere in the world. You know, like we're all people and we all like to experience joy, and we all do have a right, as like especially kids, but I mean everybody has a right to enjoy themselves, and I think that should be our goal globally. So yeah, so then of course I wanted to quickly shout out this, which is the Oakland dock workers refused to unload Israeli cargo ships, which is kind of, you know, when you think about union organizing and what unions can really do in these international struggles. Like, of course, the dock workers, I think, are the first thing that you think of a lot of times because, you know, it's just the images of people blockading boats and really ensuring that the boats don't get unloaded are so powerful. So yeah, I wanted to shout that out. And then
directly stopping capitalism. Like there's no two ways about it.
And you know, I think it's hard that it's this way, but so much of the change that's going to happen in the world are these local victories on the ground in different places. Like that's what really builds up to change. And it's hard to, I think it's hard, number one, to communicate that in like media. You know, I mean, it's easy when it's something like striking dock workers blockading a ship is like a very easy sign of that. But like I've thought about this a lot with like socialist movies. Like it's really hard to create like a victory in the end. Like what's your victory in the end of a socialist movie? And so a lot of times I think about I don't know. I think about the Boots Riley movie and the end of it really it's like the blockade, like they win at a union blockade, you know what I mean? And they're all fighting in the streets and everyone is okay after that. Sorry to bother you. I don't know. I've watched that movie like 100,000 times.
Yeah.
I don't know why it just slipped my mind for a second. I get like really focused on one subject and then completely forget like everything else in my head, like SpongeBob and well, but yeah, so like, you know, it's these small victories really are how change ends up happening because, you know, things don't necessarily I mean, a lot of times things do happen in history in these big moments, but like we don't really learn about these individual victories leading up to it. And so yeah, so I wanted to shout that out. And so for the last thing I wanted to move away from this topic for a minute and just once again, because we did it on Monday in the post game, but I wanted to play that Grimes
oh no,
the Grimes TikTok, and I wanted to get your thoughts on it. We had a really funny post game with David Slavic where he just released it as like a solo clip. We were talking about that. So I don't know. That's my new go-to clip to play. Well, I gotta pull it up. It's gonna take a second because I have to do it on actual TikTok.
Good luck with that.
Proposition for the communists. So typically, most of the communists I know are not big fans of AI. But if you think about it, AI is actually the fastest path to communism. So if implemented correctly, AI could actually theoretically solve for abundance. Like we could totally get to a situation where nobody has to work. Everybody is provided for with a comfortable state of being, comfortable living. AI could automate all the farming, weed out systematic corruption, thereby bringing us to as close as possible to genuine equality. So basically everything that everybody loves about communism, but without the collective farm. Because let's be real, enforced farming is really not a vibe.
Yeah. We were talking about it with David, and one of the things that we were talking about was the fact that, you know, at the same time, like Elon Musk obviously has spent like decades like fear mongering about like the potential AI dictatorship, and the only way to get out of that is like his Neuralink, like fusing ourselves with the AI, because obviously it's inevitable, which it isn't inevitable. Like we could just stop doing it, we could stop researching it, but you know, under capitalism, you know, it's inevitable that AI is going to come, and are we going to be able to control it, or is it going to control us? And his solution is obviously like he's the AI dictator. Yeah, like you download your consciousness into like
the credentials.
Yeah.
And like the thing that's most striking to me about that clip is that AI doesn't produce matter. Like we can't have abundance because of AI. Just because AI might make farming more efficient, that's not going to make more food out there, and it's definitely not going to distribute the food amongst the people who needs it. Yeah. And then amongst every other problem with that clip.
And you know, the other topic that, you know, we talked about that I was thinking about a lot is like ownership. Like who owns the AI? Like you have to have a state where these things are like communally owned, ahead of time, and then like it has to be like a democratized version of that. Otherwise, it's just a tech company running everything, and they're in control. And then if they lose control of the AI, like, all right, so then they've lost control, and then the AI is in charge. But like that's not what's going to happen. Like they're going to. It's just going to be like several small companies, just like it is now, like who have done the most research on AI, like in control of AI. And I don't know, dude. You watch Elon Musk, like you watch the Tesla thing where he threw the thing at the truck. And the windows were supposed to be like, you watch that and you think like
my students actually.
Yeah. No, but you watch that and you think like, do you want that guy, number one, like just like competence wise, to be the one to download your consciousness, and number two, all of his problematic points and the fact that he's a fucking billionaire that is going to keep things the way it is, except for I think he just sees everybody enslaved to him, like, or enslaved to a small group of capitalists as he colonizes Mars, like. Like I just, I don't, it's just interesting that she says it in that way. And it's like, it's supposed to appeal to like everybody on the left, and without, discussing once like the concept of ownership, without discussing like the democratization of it. It's just like, and that really has been how these tech marketing things have happened. Like the internet is democratized just because there's a lot of information and it exists. But that's not true. And that hasn't proved true. Corporations just move in and territorialize everything the same way they always have. I think that there were dreams that, some of the more both libertarian minded and, socialist minded, original, like people who worked on creating the internet, had like as a model, but like, obviously that's not what happened. Like the real estate just got bought up by corporations one by one. It's virtual real estate. Yeah. So I don't know.
Free real estate. No. Yeah. Like
is that a vibe?
The corruption line too got me, because technocrats really think that you can use like algorithms and models and stuff to weed out corruption, and that just scares the shit out of me.
Yeah,
like,
well, that's the statistic thing. The same as, like, it's the same statistic thing that ever since watching that video, by the way, I noticed like I have like a slight lisp. It's not as bad as Grimes's is. But no, but that's like, it's the same thing we were talking about with like, oh, well, more students graduating by definition means more students educated, which means better public schools. And then, so we have to teach to a test now. You know what I mean? It's the same thing with corruption. There's tons of things that we don't think of as corruption, or that they don't think of as corruption. It's not like a statistic based thing. You know what I mean? Like there's lots of types of corruption that like politicians just kind of, working with corporations, just as we saw in that last thing, like being in control of large parts of the apparatus, like that's supposedly owned or under the purview of like colleges. Like there's so many different things that like they're never going to weed out, because if you're like a techno futurist and that's like your one goal, like, oh, we can neoliberalize everything and eventually like the technology will get so good that everything will be perfect. Like that's not.
That goes right back to that ownership question.
Yeah,
like, it's what's the Stalin line that I don't care who votes, I care who counts the votes. Like that's the neoliberal mindset too. Like, if democracy is bad and it's messy, so let's get the experts together to make all the decisions. And who chooses who those experts are? Well, they're never going to say out loud, but it's always whoever has the most money.
Yeah. And of course the most the biggest like thought of that is Timothy Geithner choosing everybody who worked in the Obama administration. Like, you know what I mean? Like they're like, oh, well, don't worry, Timothy Geithner is an expert. And it's like, yeah, but like now it's an extreme, like if you're handling the financial crash, like it's assumed that experts by neoliberal advocates, I guess, I mean, if you can call them that, like establishment advocates, that if you have expertise in the field, you're somehow apart from the you're the person we want running things, and you're somehow apart from like the possible corruption. And it's like, no, that's never been how it works. But do you have any final thoughts about this? I know I said I'd keep it down to an hour, and we're at an hour 10.
Just that the Faint and Ladytron exist. Like you don't have to listen to Grimes, people. Like the techno clash scene of the early 2000s will satisfy any Grimes fix you need. So we can I don't believe in cancel culture, but we can kind of step away from Grimes for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good way to put it. We have your two shows right here, the Kenzo Shibata show and Meet the Left, which I've been on, and I had so much fun on that show, the all producer episode.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I guess I don't really know what's up next on the schedule. I haven't checked it, so I can't do Ben's thing where he plugs things. Do you have anything to plug?
Let's see. Just, my Patreon, patreon.com/Kenzo Shibata. We did an interview recently with Hy Thurman of the Young Patriot Organization, setting the record straight that he was never a white supremacist. And in fact, Fred Hampton would never work with white supremacists.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why that needs to be stated again in 2021, but apparently it does. All right. Yeah, so this has been fun. I want to keep having like conversations like these with you because I think it's
this is fun
as like a somewhat regular thing because I feel like we need to focus on how all of these issues are interconnected, and this is a perfect example of that. So thank you so much for being on.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Forrest.
Left is best.
Left is best.